There are those who say that we have no rights anymore, that our rights has been taken from us. I've even seen a bumper sticker to that effect in the last week. I think, for instance, one of the biggest rights we're missing since about 1951, since socialized medicine and Thorazine, the first lobotomy drug, basically came into existence, is the right as to how we die. All of a sudden, massive numbers were expected by trained officials to die in hospitals and quote-unquote nursing homes. And if you were, quote, lucky, at home with hospice over a very extended period of time, again pumped full of drugs. And we've lost, I suppose, quote, the right as to how our children spend their time. These days they're expected to, quote, get an education till at least, age 16? If not 18. But how do you define education? What if the best education is observation, not someone else telling you the way things are? Or they're telling you the way things are, but with so much data, so much information that it's just chaotic, and you come out worse than when you went in. And that has, of course, not even touched upon the reality that maybe someone else's point of view has a whole lot to do with distractivism, like what you would hear the word materialistic mentioned all too often, or maybe it doesn't incorporate a spiritual view, or maybe it has a certain other orientation in general. And certainly, too, there are those who say we've lost, quote, the right as to keeping a clear mind, as I would put it. For it is all too easy to end up in a medical system, shall we say, in which either you or your children or your parents are administered powerful tranquilizing drugs, which essentially lobotomize a person, strip them of emotions and mental functioning, such that even a genius administered such drugs before the age of 65 basically would be lucky to be able to function bagging groceries at a local store for decades perhaps. So as per old age, once again, I believe we've lost in certain countries our quote right as to how we will spend our elderly years. It is certain people who tell us what food they deem us to eat as being most nutritious. It must be designed by scientists, basically, they say. Those with at least a master's degree in nutrition, nutrition science, whatever. Or that somebody will decide for us how much socializing is appropriate, as opposed to our having the right to decide. Maybe they will say that we're isolating too much and we need to be in an environment where there's more social activity, more planned activities, even if it ends up being simply bingo, which frankly many people do not enjoy after a few times, or TV as entertainment too. Maybe it is said, I could humorously say, that they can provide it when you as an elderly person can't afford the cable bill anymore. And so there, too, decided for you that their form of entertainment, whether, again, bingo or 500 channels or even 20 channels of TV, is in your best interest. It's even decided for us all too often how quickly or how slowly we're going to die, whereupon it is termed in rather derogatory or nasty terms a method of death that is quite quick and merciful, whereas a slower form of death, shall we call it bleeding by whatever means, over a long period of time, say at least a couple months, if not years, is deemed by some people much more appropriate, even though it happens to dovetail quite exactly with financial benefits to the other party, quite undeniable, and something that we would never have chosen of our own sort once we find ourselves in it, and we find suddenly our not being able to protest it because we have been administered chemicals powerful enough to basically lobotomize us or neutralize our brains, and more of the sort that have minimal side effects as per brain damage. Since again, the first of these drugs in 1951, Thorazine, which had many nasty side effects at that time, but have been polished up incredibly as time has gone by. Not to mention a sort of atypical tranquilizer, if you will, electricity of the sort termed alternatively electroconvulsive shock therapy, which, by the way, some say, if administered too much, can fry your brain. But that not being of great import if you're in a facility where it doesn't matter if your brain is fried, because you will still be able to eat and provide for clothing and heating and cooling and water, etc. It will all be provided to you till your very end of breath. Now, I probably don't need to spell out the obvious to at least some, that there are only certain people who are allowed by law to tell the rest of us how we are going to live. And there are only certain people who thus get to set policy at the national or state level, enforceable by laws in courts and by various institutional structures. These are the people who have been trained. These are the people with the credentials that say they have the training and the rest of the people do not. This training is deemed scientific, not intuitive, not spiritual. This training is also deemed the accumulation of all experiences that have come before to the present time, packaged in one big viewpoint that is best for mankind, or one's country at least. This training then is also deemed, shall we say, not superstitious. And to those who do not want to participate in one form or another in how it is deemed we best live or die, and wish to exit life, shall we say, on their own terms. They are all too often deemed and then pilloried on the news shows and magazines, tabloids, if you will, at local supermarkets even, and the 6 o'clock news, as, quote, mentally ill for having done themselves in, shall we say, instead of going to a, quote, helper who can administer a drug or other treatment, shall we say, in a facility that would extend their physical lifespan. And alas, there's no discussion as to their mental state while they are, in fact, living a longer lifespan than what the person might have chosen on their own accord. Yes, there are numerous numbers of people today who may live longer by some trained professionals program than they would on their own. But what are we talking about by living? For are you alive if you are brain dead or emotionally dead, or even half brain dead or half emotionally dead? For if your mind is a vegetable, or your way of life in general is a little vestige of what it used to be or what you find tolerable, and by vestige I mean you are found cast back to infancy almost, is this really acceptable? Is this really living? Thus, my question is to myself and others, if it is possible to extend lifespan, and otherwise our own choosing to end life or live life on our own terms deemed inappropriate, what is the real question then? Are we living life longer if we are not really living it very well at all, but we're simply a vestige of what we once were? A regression, if you will, again, almost back to infancy, in terms of emotionality, in terms of what brings us joy. All too often made tolerable only because of chemicals or electricity, shall we say, administered to us, so that we are not screaming at the top of our lungs in agony and anger. And this observable, by the way, to any and all relatives and friends who might come to visit us from time to time. This, again, possible only since 1951, basically since the discovery of thorazine, the first chemical substance that is massively, powerfully neutralizing of anger and fear. It didn't exist before 1951. Thoughts to consider.